Thank you, Chairman. I want to start, before I do my introduction, by acknowledging, and I'm sorry, every time I watch that video, I get emotional. Because at that point in time in Ed's community, they were on suicide watch. There were so many young people taking their lives because of their feeling of hopelessness. And when I see that video, it gives me strength again to stand up in audiences like this, because I know those young people in our communities, although they say, why us, they know what their future is, and they rely on each and every one of us to ensure that they are able to have a life where they will not consider suicide as a goal. So, thank you, Ed. Respected elders, honored councillors, chairman, deputy chair, all region members, my friends and relatives. I want to thank the people whose sacred ground we are on today. My name is Tl'azt'en, and I'm humbled to stand here before you today to share with you a little bit about who my people are and the struggles we've had over the past 125 years. I'm going to start with a very short video to give you a flavor, to give you a little bit of a way to come into my community. And then I'm going to do a PowerPoint presentation that goes into some more detail of how we as the Musqueam people have come to where we are going, and how that fight for the implementation of our rights and title continues, but has such more solid ground with the work that people like Ed and others in this room have done at the United Nations and at our federal government. So if you can play the video, it's called Musqueam Through Time. It's not the complete video because of the short time frame we're in. So as soon as it's over, I'll come back and go into a little more detail. So.
We have always lived here since the beginning of time. We are the Musqueam, people of the Rivergrass, and we've been here on the Fraser River and throughout Vancouver's inlets for thousands of years.
History has described that every nation of the world, that those who were the richest lived at the river deltas, the Roman Empire, likewise with us here in Musqueam.
As long as we can remember, there was a rich food supply here at the Fraser's mouth, and we hunted, trapped, and fished the rivers and oceans, harvesting salmon. We are traditional Hunt-Kaminam-speaking people and are descended from the cultural group known as the Coast Salish, here in the Pacific Northwest. While we welcomed peaceful guests to our territory, we also kept a lookout for invaders, northern tribes, looking for slaves or resources.
When they'd come down, they always used to say, you gotta stay away, stay right of the gray wall. That's what they call Point Grey down there, the big gray wall. You have to go around it. If you go up that river, unless you're coming in peace and bearing gifts, you're in for a battle. Because their battlegrounds just down by the Molly, one of our old villages there, they found skulls and arrowheads and all artifacts of the battles that went on there.
We had our various warriors and lookouts, and these individuals would run to the various village sites to inform those heads of families that we had guests coming, and they would inform them whether or not those guests were indeed friend or foe. We were always prepared that they were the enemy approaching. These runners were our warriors. They were individuals who had to be physically fit because our lives depended upon it.
But in 1808, a new kind of visitor arrived. Fur trader Simon Fraser was the first to come overland and down our river. Previous experiences with European explorers, Captain Vancouver and Galliano, had taught us to be wary of these strangers. So when Fraser arrived, we attacked. In those days, the Musqueam had some 40 village sites spread out across miles of present-day Greater Vancouver. This allowed us to access the resources and protect our territory.
And the warriors there from each village site would amass in strategic locations ready to do battle. And our government structure depended upon it, because we could not lose our young and we could not lose our women, who were basically the true historians of our community. They were the ones who were educating our children.
The power of our leadership was represented in these mountain goat wool blankets and robes, unique to the Coast Salish people, and the Musqueam have always had their own distinct designs for these spiritual articles of clothing.
The blanket that the individual would wear would be identifiable to his place in his home, his family, his community. These more complex blankets, the ones that they wore when they traveled and went to meet King George in England, would be the best dressed. That's what they're wearing them for. It's when we get ready to go somewhere, we wear our suits and our best clothes, and that's what they did.
Once a forgotten art, weaving was brought back to life by Musqueam women in the early 1980s.
My grandfather one day said to me, "You want to see some really nice stuff?" And I said, "Sure." I must have been maybe 10 or 11. He went upstairs and he came down with a bag, and in the bag he had an old, what they call swilquat blanket, and it was made from goat hair and dog hair, and it was a weaving like I had never seen before. And that's really where the whole idea of Salish weaving for me came around. The story of who we are is woven into the blankets.
Today we use sheep wool. However, of course, what they were using were mountain goat, but it was also mixed with a dog hair, different stay-and-nettle material, cedar, beaten very finely, and it might be the core of what the hair of the mountain goat would wrap around.
Cedar bark weaving has also been making a comeback, and today, Musqueam people are revisiting the traditional ways of harvesting cedar, including the blessing of the site. Due to the scarcity of cedar in our now urban territory, today we need to travel at least an hour away to find the bark we need. Here, our people strip the bark in the traditional way, a technique that can be hard to master, but ultimately leaves the trees standing.
Good one.
Once gathered and dried, these cedar strips will be used to make a variety of traditional objects, like baskets, balers, and mats.
Traditions like weaving continued for many years after contact as we continued to trade with the newcomers. But all of that changed with the coming of disease in the mid-1800s, which took an enormous toll on all First Nations. Then missionaries and the gold rush followed. As resources were extracted all around us, Musqueam people learned to adapt, working as farmers and fishermen while retaining our cultural ways and spiritual teachings.
We were fortunate. We didn't have a priest residing in our community, because the priest would only come in the summertime. So when they banned the potlatch and outlawed it, our people of the past were quite smart. They moved their summer ceremony and merged it along with our winter ceremony so that they could continue to practice non-stop what they had been practicing for thousands and thousands of years.
Beyond our longhouse ceremonies, we had a spiritual connection to the land and water around us. The ocean, rivers, and creeks fed us both physically and spiritually. These bathing rituals are important to Musqueam people even today. Combined with sacred dance, song, and ritual in our longhouses, we have always found a balance of mind, body, and spirit.
We had two kinds of ceremonies. One, the winter ceremony with the longhouse. It was somewhat of a secret society, which only those people who were initiated into it participated and attended. But also as well, they had potlatches in the summertime, whereby another ceremony where our masks were used in the outdoor ceremony to mark the occasion of marriages, namings, memorials, coming of age, within that spiritual rites of passage. It allows you to indeed reach to the other senses that the Creator provided to you, that you no longer use. You almost start to see with your ears and hear with your eyes. That's the only way I can sort of describe it.
Stretching some 1,400 kilometers from its source in northern BC, the Fraser is one of Canada's longest rivers and is the heart and soul of the Musqueam people. While technology has brought a lot of change to our people, we're still tied to this river that has nourished us for centuries. Today, like everywhere in the world, fish stocks are threatened. And so these fisheries officers from Musqueam and Tl'azt'en First Nations patrol the Fraser's waters to ensure that the right salmon stocks are being fished.
I know.
This year, there's been a huge drop in the number of sockeye on the river. And so far, only a brief spring salmon run has been open to fishing. These Musqueam people are continuing a fishing tradition which has run in their families for centuries.
Barbecue time. Been fishing this spot for 22 years. Before that was my grandfather. Before that was his father. It's done our family well over the, many generations since we've been here. And hope to have it for another 100 years to come for my children and my children's children.
Musqueam has long been on the front lines in getting Aboriginal, ancestral, and treaty fishing rights acknowledged. Thanks to the 1990 Sparrow decision, it is now a part of the Canadian Constitution.
When we went to court, we said very strongly that our Aboriginal right to fish is something that's been here from time immemorial, and we went through all of the arguments, and the Supreme Court of Canada came down on our side of this. The Sparrow case set the groundwork for Aboriginal rights across the country, and I think throughout the world, because there's been people from throughout the world, Indigenous people, coming and asking how they could come to the same place in their communities.
I have now been fishing on the river here and on the coast of BC for 47 years now. I started with my dad at 8 years of age, and every year since. It's not just salmon. We're somewhat in a decline in other stocks here. Sturgeon, hooligans. They were a big part of our diet throughout the year, and that's now no more. With any ethnic group in the world, that when you have a lifelong and generational connection, it becomes a part of you, and this river certainly is a part of us, and it always will be.
Where do I put? Just here? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I'm looking at the time, and I'm going to go through a little faster than I thought, because we want to have some open discussion. I think that's how we learn the best from each other. So I'm going to see if I can do this myself. This gives you a better idea of where Musqueam is situated, the city of Vancouver. You saw the map in the video. We have 3 small communities, and we've been there for over 9,000 years. We have 1,200 people in our small community, with half of them living off reserve. So see, I'm not very good at this. Okay. In the 1970s, elders who have since gone on put a declaration down to the government talking about who we are, what our goals and aspirations are, and this declaration has given life to everything subsequent chiefs and councils have done in protecting our rights and title, and actually negotiating with successive governments. It's much longer than that. I just took one paragraph that I thought was really important for us to see, because it goes along with UN DRIP. If you look at the wording, it's almost the same as UN DRIP with regard to that we have the right to govern ourselves with our own customs, beliefs, and laws. This one I'm going to go through really fast as well. The whole idea of who we are as Musqueam was grounded in the idea of us being fisher people. We ended up with the smallest reserve base in Canada because they said, you will always be on the water, that's your land. Therefore, just quickly, they gave 18 to 20 acres per head of every reserve they negotiated across the country. They gave us 2 because they said we would always be on the water. They have since taken away our ability to get on the water. This next slide is just a little bit more of how our elders have taught us that with every right that we have comes a responsibility, and that is to ensure that we always protect the environment and ensure that the sustenance for our people is here into the future generations. With regard to how we have been protecting our rights, Musqueam is one of the most litigious bands in Canada. I'm not a lawyer like my husband, but I start to learn all of it because of all the cases we've taken. I'm just talking 2 here. Sorry? Oh, well, that's what I am. That's the kind of lawyer I am. The federal government, in their wisdom, came to our community about a development that they were proposing, and they actually misled the people. We still had, our elders were still not able to speak English very well and couldn't read. So they put X's onto a document that they didn't realize that they would not be able to see the content of for over 15 years. And once that document came out and they found out, most of them had passed on, but their descendants, we in fact sued the federal government for misrepresentation, and from that came what is called the Garen Case. In that Garen Case, not only does it talk about the establishment of the relationship between the federal government and Musqueam, it also starts to lay out the beginning of the recognition that reserve lands are to be similar and looked at as the same as Aboriginal title lands. And the next case we got, of course, is the one I was just referring, it was just in the video, the Sparrow Case. Both of these cases are now used across the country and I think internationally as foundational pieces on the recognition of title and on the recognition of rights. In fact, Sparrow was the first case that went forward after the Constitution and the section that Ed referred to, Section 35, that recognizes our rights and title. So Musqueam was able to put that case forward before anyone else. One of the most important things that Sparrow, sorry, I lost myself there, in our governance, our old people always told us that we need to put together capable governing institutions and economies that match our culture, but that we never lose sight of those the foundational pieces, which are our values: respect, pride, inclusiveness, honor, and the most important one that they laid down for us was the idea that we all have a shared responsibility when we are moving forward, setting up our governance, our economics, all of the institutions that we are now into. This, I'm not going to talk about this one because Ed has done this, but in the negotiations we're in now, it has been instrumental in helping Musqueam with the negotiations we have with the federal government. I'm going to go to the next slide and try and go through quicker on this. You can see here these circles. We are currently a band under the Indian Act, a legal entity, and our elders have told us we are not to call ourselves a nation until we get out of the government's Indian Act and are making our own legislative decisions and implementing those based on our values. So we now, because of the court cases, because of the negotiation, because of even the protests, and Musqueam's gone protesting a number of times, we now are at the table with the federal government, and we have had 4 ministers of the federal government sit with us and develop cabinet documents that are about who we are, what our lands are, what the revenue sharing is on those lands, and how we are going to co-manage the fishery coming from Sparrow. So we have 4 federal ministers. We've got the Minister of Indian Affairs, we've got the Minister of Transport, we've got the Minister of Natural Resources, and the Minister of Fisheries. Those, what are called term sheets, are creating a cabinet document that's going to go to the federal government for us to be able to have the ability to manage and to share in all of the revenue on the lands that, the federal crown lands that are in our traditional territory. We're also at what is called a self-governance table, so that we will be able to have all of the legislative legal authorities to manage, and we'll be completely out of the Indian Act. So that is a huge movement for Musqueam, and we really appreciate all the work that people like Ed have done to ensure that the UN DRIP is giving life to these. I'm going to go through this one because it's really, this one's important for our community. Nothing we do is done without the direction of the community, and we have what we call a comprehensive community plan. So every staff member has to follow these 5 points that have been given by the community. We also have direction from our council. I'm in the position of being one of the chief negotiators, and we always have mandates from the council so we can do the negotiation. And if you look at this, the title and rights mandate looks at the crown land dispositions, the major projects, the private sector opportunities, and they're all looked at from the perspective of our title rights and our interests so that they're economic, they're socioeconomic, and they're cultural. This absolutely, the next one, is showing you that there are 9 areas that we must include in every one of the negotiation documents we do. So it's not just stewardship and responsibility, education, employment and training, archaeology, the revenue sharing and cash components. I'm going to go to the next, oh, sorry, I missed one here, but the actual agreements that we have right now are doing revenue sharing with private industry businesses. That's never been done anywhere in the country. So the airport in Vancouver is on our land. We have a reserve there. It's an island right across from the main reserve. They are a not-for-profit organization. But we now have an agreement with them that share the revenue of every dollar that comes into that airport because of their recognition of our rights and title. So it's never been done anywhere, but it's because of the change in the population of Canada to recognize that if they want to move forward in a reconciliation manner, they need to be at the table with First Nations, and they've done this with Musqueam. We are now trying to get the government to do the same thing on revenue sharing on all the other pieces of land that the federal government has. These are just some of the agreements we're into, and I wanted to put this out here because it shows that we tax everyone on our lands. We have our own taxation authority, so everybody that's on our land gets taxed by us. We use that in a relationship with the City of Vancouver, an agreement on that. We also have friendship agreements and sustainability agreements with those businesses on the river that are expanding right now. That is something that isn't done anywhere else as well. And we have a relationship with the province where we co-manage 300 waterfront leases on the north, middle, and south arm of the Fraser River, all in recognition of Musqueam rights and title. This map, I know you can't see it, but it shows you the small pieces of land that we are reacquiring now. So through negotiation, through court cases, through protests, we are now renegotiating lands and getting them returned to our community. In fact, they've done an evaluation of the lands that Musqueam now holds through these 3 areas, and they are the most valuable real estate in Canada. Although they're small, they're the most valuable real estate. We are now developing them ourselves. We've got a number of developments we're doing on our own, but we also have developments with our surrounding First Nations communities. We've gone back to our traditional relationship with them, and we have a development corporation that's looking at federal crown lands in the city of Vancouver. So we have our own development corporation on our lands, and then we've joined with our brothers and sisters in the other communities and are developing other crown lands. So hopefully, our goal is that we will one day have all of our lands back. We know the city of Vancouver doesn't want to move away, but we'll do whatever we can to get as much of it back. So I don't think I need to go through this. I think you understand keys to success after listening to all of the discussion over the last 2 days. I want to underscore in closing that if I closed my eyes and didn't know that I was sitting in a room in Australia, I would absolutely think I was sitting in a meeting room in Musqueam. The issues you're discussing, the goals forward that you have, everything that drives you to come to these sessions are exactly the same as in Musqueam, in British Columbia, and in Canada. And the kinds of comments that Ed made are ones that I would like to underscore. We have a saying in our community from our language that says, "Not samat and squallowing." That means we are all one. Our hearts are all joined together as we move forward. And I want to leave that with you and say hi, Tl'azt'en and squallowing, and thank you for listening to me this morning. Thank you.